January 25, 2019, 11:50 at night. A private jet idling on a runway outside Geneva, Switzerland. Inside the cabin, a woman in her late 20s sits frozen, staring at a banking app on her phone, watching a balance that should hold tens of thousands of dollars instead show numbers she cannot make sense of. She does not know it yet, but this moment, on this jet, paid for with money that was never really his, marks the beginning of the end for a man who has spent years building one of the most elaborate romance frauds in modern history. His name is Simon Leviev, and for the women who fell for him, the nightmare is only just beginning to make sense. To understand how this happened, the story has to go back to 2018, when a charming, impeccably dressed man begins appearing on dating apps across Europe under the name Simon Leviev, presenting himself as the son of Lev Leviev, a real Israeli billionaire known as the King of Diamonds. It is a claim with no truth to it at all. The real Leviev family has no connection to this man, but the name carries instant credibility, instant glamour, and instant trust. He matches with women on Tinder, takes them on first dates to five-star restaurants, arrives in chauffeured cars and private jets, and within days sweeps them into a world of extraordinary wealth that appears, on the surface, completely real. The pattern repeats itself with devastating precision. He meets a woman, often through Tinder, sometimes through mutual circles. The courtship moves fast. Within weeks, he is flying her to Bulgaria, to Amsterdam, to cities across Europe on private jets, staying in five-star suites, showering her with gifts. He tells her he loves her. He makes her feel like the center of an impossibly glamorous life. And then, like clockwork, the story shifts. He claims his enemies, rivals from the diamond business, are hunting him. He says his bodyguard has been attacked. He says he cannot use his own credit cards because his enemies are tracking him. He asks her to open a credit card in her name, just temporarily, just to keep him safe. Out of love, out of fear for his safety, she agrees. What follows is not a single request, but a sustained campaign of psychological manipulation. He pushes for larger and larger amounts, credit lines stretched to their limits, loans taken out, a woman's entire financial life restructured around protecting a man she believes is in mortal danger. He sends fabricated images, evidence designed to make his claims of danger feel real. Bloodied phone screens, panicked messages, a carefully constructed performance of crisis built to keep the money flowing. By the time any one woman realizes something is wrong, she's often already drained her savings, maxed out multiple credit cards, and taken on debt that will follow her for years. And by then, Simon has already moved on, often to another woman, running the exact same script from the beginning. For one woman, the unraveling begins on that private jet outside Geneva, watching her bank balance refuse to make sense, realizing in real time that the funds she believed were available to her were not. She is left stranded in a foreign country, betrayed by a man she had trusted completely. What makes her case different is not the betrayal itself, but what she chooses to do next. Instead of disappearing in shame, she begins reaching out, quietly, carefully, to find out if she is truly alone. She is not. She finds a second woman, then a third, each carrying their own version of the same story, the same jets, the same excuses, the same disappearing act once the money ran dry. Together, these women make a decision that will ultimately bring the entire scheme into the light. They take their stories to journalists at a Norwegian newspaper, sharing documents, bank records, messages, and photographs that lay out the pattern in exhaustive detail. The investigation that follows is methodical and damning, cross-referencing flight records, financial transactions, and the testimonies of multiple women who had never met each other but had lived through nearly identical experiences. When the story finally publishes, it does not simply describe a bad relationship. It exposes a system, a repeatable, almost industrial process for extracting trust and converting it into cash. The public response is immediate and overwhelming. The story spreads across social media within hours, shared by people stunned not just by the scale of the deception, but by how recognizable the tactics feel: urgency, isolation, manufactured crisis. The same patterns that show up in smaller, quieter versions of manipulation everywhere. Women who had stayed silent for years, ashamed of having been fooled, suddenly find themselves part of a much larger conversation about how convincingly a confident, well-dressed liar can rewrite someone's sense of reality. Despite the scale of the fraud, estimated at several $1 million across multiple victims, the legal consequences turn out to be strikingly limited. Simon Leviev had already served prison time in Israel on prior fraud-related convictions before this scheme came to light. And following the public exposure of his romance scam, he faces scrutiny but largely avoids significant new criminal accountability tied directly to these specific cases. A frustrating outcome for the women who came forward, and a sobering reminder of how difficult it can be to prosecute fraud that crosses international borders and relies on willing, if deceived, financial participation rather than direct theft. In the years that follow, the women who exposed him do not fade quietly back into private life. Their decision to speak publicly transforms a humiliating personal betrayal into a cautionary story that reaches millions of people. A story that becomes required viewing for anyone navigating modern dating. A permanent reminder that charm, luxury, and confidence are not evidence of truth. Simon Leviev, for his part, leans into the notoria, appearing in interviews and even reality television, a choice that many observers find deeply unsettling given what the women involved went through, but one that underscores an uncomfortable truth about modern fame, that infamy itself can become a kind of currency. What remains, beneath the headlines and the social media outrage, is a simpler and more uncomfortable lesson. Romance fraud does not require violence to destroy a life. It requires only trust, patience, and a willingness to perform love convincingly enough that the person on the other end stops asking the right questions until it is far too late. For the women at the center of this story, the financial damage may eventually fade, but the deeper cost, the erosion of trust in their own judgment, the fear of being fooled again, lingers far longer than any bank statement ever could.